Congressman Jamie Raskin, honored to have you back here on Mea Culpa. Good to see you, my friend. Thankful for you beyond words. I do have so much to ask you, so little time. This hour goes by very, very quickly. So, Congressman, let me start by asking you this. Trump's slapping these blanket tariffs on everything from Chinese tech to Mexican avocados. And his base, they just cheer. Isn't this just a hidden tax on working Americans who already can't afford eggs and rent and gasoline? So my question I really want to ask you is, how does Congress push back on this economic gaslighting? And more importantly, why do they refuse, as even members of Congress, to acknowledge that these tariffs are a tax on the American consumer?
Well, I'm totally with you, Michael. I mean, it's a national sales tax is what it is. So if you increase tariffs by 18%, which I think is what the average is now, despite the fact they've come down from like more than 100% in some cases, but 18% is still the highest it's been since the Smoot-Hawley tariffs that helped to kick off the economic depression of the 1930s. But if you impose an 18% tariff, that's like imposing an 18% sales tax. And so, there are two things we can do that we are doing and that we must do. One is we need to get the tariff struck down in court, because it's up to Congress to regulate international commerce under Article 1. Congress has always set tariffs before, and so this is illegal. Trump invokes the IEPA, the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, claiming that he's got the power to impose tariffs, although IEPA doesn't mention tariffs, and nobody's ever used it for tariffs before. And what's the emergency he's citing? The emergency, he says, is this has been going on for 4 or 5 decades, and he's the only president who will act. Well, something that's been going on for 4 or 5 decades doesn't sound like much of an emergency. But look, the other thing is we got to legislate, and I want to put real pressure on the Republicans to come along with us on this. With Senator Schumer, I introduced a bill called the Truth in Tariffs Act, which says, if it normally costs you $1,000 to buy a computer, but now it's going to cost you $1,180, that the ticket price should say on it $1,000 for the computer, $180 for the Trump tariff, so people know what it is they're paying for.
It reminds me very much of what Mayor Mike Bloomberg had done when he forced restaurants, especially chain restaurants, to put down how many calories each and every item is, so that people know exactly what it is they're consuming. I guess here, as a buyer, you are a consumer, not of food, but of materials. And yeah, that way they could actually, every time that they drop money for an item, they know exactly how much money that is going towards this alleged tariff tax that only is applied to the country of origin.
I mean, when you go out for lunch in New York, you get a hamburger and French fries, and then you pay, you see how much is the hamburger, how much is French fries, how much is your Coke, and how much is the sales tax right there. So we need to know what our Trump tax is on everything that we're purchasing now. And it's impossible to keep track of it. I think it's like a yo-yo. Some days they're on, some days they're off. With this country, they're up. With that country, they're down. And so the government has got to put some clarity into the situation, because, as you're better aware than anybody, he also governs through chaos and confusion.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this then. How is it possible that more people aren't out there? You're only one person, and as I applaud you and your ferocity in terms of trying to get this issue to the American people, how is it possible that they are acknowledging, and I'm talking about the GOP and these MAGA morons, how is it possible that they are declaring a win with the UK tariff agreement that they reached, when the UK is actually one of the very few countries that we actually have a trade surplus with? I mean, that's like Mike Tyson beating up a nursery school kid and running around the streets and saying, "Hey, I won."
I mean, it's all propaganda with these people, and pretty soon, I think reality is going to start hitting people. Um, when the price of electronics, the price of computers, the price of cars start skyrocketing, you know, Donald Trump was able to squeak out a very slender election by saying that he was going to reduce the price of eggs. Well, the price of eggs is higher than it's ever been. And the price of eggs Benedict is just untenable because we're dealing with all of his betrayals of the rule of law. I mean, the guy is trying to collect a $400 million jumbo jet flying grift from Qatar this week while they dismantle $880 billion from Medicaid and Head Start and Meals on Wheels, and the SNAP program. Anything that actually helps people is being cut, while the Trump family is looting and plundering the country and the whole world with all these other autocrats and dictators. Do you know that Trump has made more than $1 billion a month since the second term grift began?
No. He's made a whole lot more than that. If you take literally from the day that he became president-elect to today, he has actually made over $10 billion. And that's real money. That's not like the fake dollars that I was involved in on the personal financial statement or his condition of financial worth. He has made over $10 billion between his Truth Social stock, between his meme coins, between his NFTs, between the licensing deals. And my friend, this is only the deals that we know. I'm not even talking about the billions of dollars in terms of selling the most number of Boeing, jets to to Saudi Arabia that, he was the broker of. I didn't know that the president of the United States doubles as a jet charter broker, for foreign countries. I didn't know that was part of the job description. What the hell do I know, right?
Well, no scam, no grift is too big or too small. And of course, all of it directly collides with the US Constitution. I mean, I feel like sometimes I'm citing some, ancient Egyptian document written in hieroglyphics or something, but there we go. I appreciate you keeping it close to your heart, Michael. But look, Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution says that no person occupying an office of trust or profit under the United States, and that starts with the President of the United States, shall, without the consent of Congress, receive a present, an emolument, an office, a title of any kind, whatever, from a king, a prince, or a foreign state. And that's all they're doing all day long. So I introduced a resolution yesterday with all the Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee. I'm hoping all the Democrats in the House will join us today. And then we'll see what the Republicans are made of, because some of them used to claim to be, strict constructionists about the Constitution and originalists and textualists. Well, all we're saying to Donald Trump is bring your flying jet, bribery force one to Congress and explain why you want to keep it. And we will vote it up or down. That's what's happened in every other case with every other president, with every other emolument. Abraham Lincoln got these two beautiful elephant tusks from the King of Siam right in the middle of the Civil War. And he actually, during the Civil War, sent them to Congress to say, he loved them. They're beautiful. He'd love to keep them. Congress says, you're doing a great job, Abe, in the war, but no, you can't keep those. Turn them over to the Department of the Interior. And same thing with Andrew Jackson, Trump's hero. He got this gold medallion from Simon Bolivar, and he wanted to keep that. He had the decency to come to Congress to say, I'd like to keep it. And they also said there, no, you can't keep it. So it's up to Congress to decide. And so Congress will have to look to see whether it comports with national security. Has this thing been debugged? Is there going to be like espionage and surveillance taking place by the Qatari government against the Americans?
Congressman,
what about the integrity question? So,
Congressman, I turn around and I say, forgetting about the bugs and forgetting about the viewing, cameras and stuff like that. Imagine if they put a kill switch in the technology, and all of a sudden they turn around and they say to the president, either you do this or we kill the engine. And what if he's flying over a city What if he's flying over the Indian Ocean? I mean, at least the Indian Ocean, it's only those that are on the plane. How about if he ends up, crash landing into the middle of a city? It's really not a joke. Not to mention, they say it's going to cost $1 billion to take that plane apart.
That's a strong argument about the danger of this that should be presented to Congress. But my point right now is just, it's not up to Donald Trump and, how much he can get away with on Fox News or whatever. It's up to the Congress of the United States, because the Constitution says you cannot accept one of those foreign gifts without the consent of Congress.
Can I ask you a question? Hypothetically, he keeps the plane. And the stupid U.S. government spends $1 billion to take the thing down to its skin in order to make sure that there are no listening, there's no national security issues, yada, yada, yada. Doesn't Trump have to pay a gift tax on that? Isn't there a gift tax on that aircraft? I would like somebody to give me $400 million.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. But of course, Trump's lawyers will say, well, it's not really a gift to Donald Trump. It's a gift to the Department of Defense. Wink, wink. We know that Donald Trump was eyeing that airplane for years, and he's wanted a flying castle of his own so he can be like the emirs and the kings and the emperors. And plus, the terms of it are that he would get to keep it after his administration's over. It's not going to the next president. It's going to his museum, so he could continue to fly it around. He's obviously not going to put it in a museum.
Congressman, I have a Substack, and in my Substack, I actually write that I think what we should do as the United States, because $400 million to buy off the United States for Qatar to plant its flag in the Oval Office is just obscene when you're talking about a country with a GDP of over $27 trillion, right? I mean, the biggest in the world. I think we should pay Trump off. I think we should buy him from Boeing, the United States government, for $500 million. Buy him an even nicer. Let's start bidding up for him to end up working for the American people and not for himself. If it's all going to take nothing but an airplane, let's just buy him a fucking airplane for $500 million, right? That way we don't have to worry about, it'll be made in America by Americans using American technology and American sweat. We save $500 million, right? Simply because we're not now taking apart the thing. And let's just go ahead and if that's what they're doing is paying him off for loyalty and for loyalty to their country, let's pay the guy off to be loyal to America.
Well, that's an illuminating hypothetical, because we're already spending hundreds of millions of dollars on Air Force One and on the new Air Force One that we already bought. They're not talking about canceling their contract. They're talking about squeezing this one in for a couple of years, for a couple of months, and then him taking it. So it really is a personal gift to him. But you're right. The American people would like a president who has pure fiduciary loyalty and fidelity to us. But guess what? He's got that theoretically because he swore an oath to defend and uphold the Constitution.
An oath, schmoth. Let's give him an aircraft.
There's a provision in the Constitution, which is the Domestic Emoluments Clause, which says the president is not allowed to take any other money from the U.S. government. It's not just foreign governments. He's limited to his salary. I know Donald Trump Jr. is always out there saying he doesn't even take his salary. That's all he's allowed to take. He's not allowed to get paid by the Saudis or the United Arab Emirates or Qatar, or to take hundreds of millions of dollars for us to retrofit an airplane that he gets from Qatar so he can have it for the rest of his life. No, that's not the way it works. We got to clean up the finances here.
Yeah, well, in Trump's world, emoluments, schmoluments, it's like the Constitution. It's merely just a piece of paper. But I want to ask you this, because we're watching Trump tariffs, not as a trade tool, not the way I see it, but more as a loyalty test, punishing countries and industries that don't come to Mar-a-Lago and kiss the ring. My question to you is, at what point does this stop being policy and become economic authoritarianism?
Well, it started that way, and clearly with him, it's going to finish that way. It's the same thing with the colleges and the universities. Like, he will start with the Godfather offer. I'm going to take all of you over. Now come in and you deal with me. And he's basically saying to the countries of the world, I'm going to jack up these tariffs to unscalable heights, and then you come in and deal with me. And that's what he's doing at the law firms too. I'm going to issue executive orders totally unlawfully banning you from federal buildings, including federal courthouses and federal security clearances, and then you come deal with me. And like the law firms gave him nearly $1 billion in free pro bono legal assistance, right? Nothing like that ever been seen before. And I'm grateful that certain law firms really stood up to him and said, hell no, you're not going to take over our law firm. Just like Harvard stood up to him and said, hell no, you're not taking over Harvard University. But that's just pure dictatorship stuff.
It sure is. Let me ask you a question then, because these tariffs, as we were talking before, they bypass congressional oversight. They distort the markets and they reward cronyism. Is there a constitutional check that I'm missing? Or do you think that we're just letting the president run trade policy like it's one of his old companies?
Well, I'm proud that I just signed up, I think, around 160 of my colleagues to join an amicus brief in one of these lawsuits brought by businesses against the tariffs. And the first thing that they say is this is not up to the president. It's up to Congress to impose tariffs. We regulate commerce with foreign nations.
Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. Now, let me be straight with you. As someone with a very public profile who spent years dealing with everything from harassment to bad faith actors digging into my life, I take my privacy very seriously because I've seen what can happen when personal data gets into the wrong hands. And let's be honest, it's never been easier to find out, for example, where someone lives, what their phone number is, or even who their family members are. I mean, that's not just creepy, it's dangerous. We're living in a time where partisans and trolls are targeting people simply for speaking their minds online. And if your info is just sitting out there, that makes you a sitting duck. And that's why I use Delete Me. They work behind the scenes to remove your personal data from hundreds of data broker sites. It's the smartest move I've made to protect my digital footprint. And it gives me peace of mind knowing I'm not just leaving that info out in the open. So take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up with Delete Me, now at a special discount for just our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting Cohen, Cohen, to 64000. The only way to get 20% off is to text Cohen to 64000. Again, that's Cohen to 64000. Message and data rates may apply. Go now.
And he can't invoke IEPA for an emergency that doesn't exist to impose tariffs in this totally wild, helter-skelter way with no rule of law and no structure to what he's doing. It's just, completely chaotic. So I do believe we're going to win that. I mean, we've got 156 preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders that have been entered against this lawlessness, against this authoritarianism. I hope the Supreme Court will hold, because they're hearing the birthright citizenship case. That's a really important one for the Supreme Court to shut that down and say, no, we're not going to allow Donald Trump with his petty little executive order overturn the first sentence of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're not wrong. But while we're talking about Trump and the chaos and so on, his inner circle is actually floating a third term presidency nonsense. Now, they'll tell you we're joking, of course, but we've seen his jokes turn into strategy. Congressman, let me ask you this. How dangerous is this rhetoric in a country already primed for political violence?
It's totally dangerous and obviously totally unconstitutional under the 22nd Amendment. I've heard a couple of different theories about it, and some people believe that he really means it. And of course, you warned the world, Michael, that he meant it when he was talking about not leaving, even if he lost in his first term. Mm-hmm. And you were right. And he incited a violent insurrection and tried to orchestrate a political coup to overthrow an election which he lost by 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. So I don't put it past him. I don't put anything past him at this point. We've got to be prepared for that. On the other hand, there's some people who say that, he couldn't care less anymore about he never really cared about, but he couldn't care less about the government or public policy. He couldn't be bothered. He's going to be worth billions, tens of billions, as you're saying. He'll be able to buy whatever he wants and get free planes from Qatar. He would just as soon get the hell out of here. And the reason they're talking about a third term is to prevent the open warfare that will ensue amongst Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, Steve Bannon, Speedy Josh Hawley, anybody who thinks they're going to be his successor. So they're trying to damp that down and make him seem like he's not the lame duck that he is.
Let me ask you this then. Is Congress actively preparing to defend the Constitution from a president who clearly sees it not as law, but as a menu of suggestions that he could pick and choose from?
Well, yes, indeed. And, we're standing up strong for the judges in the courts. And, you had a judge in your case who spoke very strongly about the outrageous violation of your First Amendment rights that took place when he tried to retaliate against you just for writing a book or daring to speak against him. I mean, that's monarchical stuff. But we have courts now, Democratic judges, Republican appointed judges across the spectrum who are striking Donald Trump down on a daily basis. We got a 9-0 ruling out of the Supreme Court saying, yes, there must be due process for people before you airlift them out of the country. You can't just pick them up, decree that they're guilty of some offense, and then send them to a torturer's prison in El Salvador. And one federal district court judge in Texas ordered that they turn vans and buses around that were on the way to the airport. So I think that the Article 3 branch, the courts are really acquitting themselves well up until this point. They are hanging tough for the rule of law. They understand what danger we're in. That's why my MAGA colleagues are in Congress talking about impeaching federal judges. We've only impeached 15 federal judges in all of American history for things like bribery, corruption, income tax evasion. One guy was habitually drunk on the bench, not even just occasionally, but habitually drunk. But we've never impeached a judge because of the content of their opinions. And as Chief Justice Roberts said a few weeks ago, the proper response to a district court opinion you disagree with is you appeal the decision. You don't try to impeach the judge. And yet you can, take you around Capitol Hill. You can see posters that my colleagues have outside of their office saying wanted with the pictures of all these judges out there.
Yeah. Look, I don't have a lot of faith as you do in the judiciary. I watched, yes, as Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein on my habeas corpus petition, something that, who was it in this administration said that we should do away with it. I mean, talk about crazy nonsense to do away with habeas. My concern is Second Department, the Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court refuse to hear a constitutional issue that many people, I think yourself included, termed as one of the most important constitutional issues in the last 100 years, to violate a U.S. citizen's right to take away or attempt to take away through a counterfeit document their ability to speak, their First Amendment constitutional right. And when they refuse to allow that First Amendment violation to exist, to be incarcerated and thrown back into solitary confinement. I mean, even the Supreme Court wouldn't hear that. I don't have a whole lot of faith. I know you're kind of, I should say, Congress is hanging a lot of its hat on the judiciary. I have a feeling that too many of them are scared. They're scared of this president, of being thrown off the bench themselves, or worse.
Well, look, I agree with all of that. And the only difference now from what took place before, and I agree that, we're in a very delicate moment here, but the people of the country are on the move. And, millions of people have participated in protests. I think you're right that if the judiciary thinks nobody's really watching and nobody cares, their most conservative and inert instincts are going to take over. But if they see that people are aroused, engaged, enlivened, and determined to defend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights against this onslaught, I think the courts will hang tough. I know these judges were very nervous, very upset about all of these impeachment drives against them. As you're saying, they're fearful for their own jobs. They're also fearful because Donald Trump, as you know, has activated every unstable, potentially violent lunatic in the country. And there's all kinds of death threats out there, all kinds of violent threats against judges, against members of their family. Justice Amy Coney Barrett's sister received a death threat. A number of justices and judges are getting these pizzas delivered to their homes or to members of their families' homes.
I had that happen to me.
Yeah. So, but I guess the point I'm making is this is why it's so important you're doing what you're doing in terms of exercising your free press rights, speaking to the hundreds of thousands or millions of people out in the country. It's why it's so important that Indivisible and Move On and all of these groups are mobilizing people to be engaged. And then that courage gives courage to Harvard and colleges and universities, to law firms like Wilmer Hale and Perkins and Coie, and it gives courage to judges and people to stand up. Because I think you're right. I mean, we heard it from which Republican senator was that? I can't remember which one, but she said, yeah, I'm frightened. We're afraid.
And so she should be. So let me ask you this then, because we've seen mass deportations of migrants from Venezuela and El Salvador, many fleeing political violence without proper hearings or legal counsel. So, Congressman, let me ask you this. Isn't this the administration openly defying court rulings and gutting due process?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, look, they're trying to get away with whatever they can get away with. I mean, if, Associated Press says the Gulf of Mexico instead of Gulf of America, they're going to try to violate the First Amendment by discriminating against them and kicking them out of the White House. They're going to try to deport immigrants from the country just by saying things like that person's MS-13, we're kicking them out without any due process at all. Just like they've done that to thousands of my constituents who are federal workers at the Agency for International Development or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau or NIH or the FDA. They're just sacking them. The whole point of the civil service is you can't be sacked like that. You got to be judged on your performance. And I've got constituents who have nothing but excellent, superior evaluations who are being fired for no reason at all. And so the courts have reversed that also, saying that these are rifts when you fire 50,000 people or 20,000 people without looking at the individual merits of anybody's case. That's a reduction in force, and you got to follow the law on that. Like 30% of the people working in the federal government are veterans, and they actually get a preference when you get to a RIF, but they didn't observe that. They're not observing the rule of law in any way.
Congressman, so what do you do, like, for example, when Eric Swalwell, a wonderful, wonderful member of Congress, Democrat, of course, who turns around and asks Secretary Noem, Kristi Noem, something as simple as, is the tattoos that the president referenced that say MS-13, are those AI generated? Are they added on, or are those actually on his hands? And in the 5 different ways that he asked her that same question, he could not elicit a response out of her. Obviously, her goal was to burn up the 5-minute time, right? Could not elicit a single response out of her, acknowledging that those are clearly AI generated above the tattoos that he has of the smiley face, the marijuana plant, the cross, and whatever else is on the hand. What do you do as somebody that is consistently, leading these hearings? What do you do when you have somebody who is a secretary of Homeland Security who refuses to answer?
Well, I'm proud of Eric Swalwell because he was dogged and wouldn't let go. And her refusal to answer that question multiple times was an answer. It was obvious that she could not vouch for that because it was clearly produced by artificial intelligence. It was clearly pasted on, and it was not part of the original photograph. So, I'm proud of all of our members who are proving in a very tough way that they're not going to put up for any more propaganda, fake news, and disinformation. And you're right; she's spouting that. The members who voted for her and other cabinet secretaries like that, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., are just going to have to wear that like a tattoo. Like that's part of their legacy that they put those people in the office.
Yeah, but they don't care about their legacy, and there's no accountability. When I testified before Congress 7 times, right? Before hearings, 9 hours each clip. You were there for at least 2, if not 3 of them. I think 3, in fact. There was no getting out and turning around. And if you asked me about these tattoos and I start talking about the secret formula to Kentucky Fried Chicken, there's going to be some repercussions to Michael Cohen. Why are there no repercussions to Secretary Noem? I mean, you are entitled as a sitting member of Congress to ask a question based upon a hearing that your committee is conducting. And when they blatantly and when they obviously refuse to answer and they're stalling and they then turn around and they get into arguments to burn your time, how come there's no accountability here? And what else can be done within which to haul her back in for maybe round 2 and then bring her in for round 3 until she could admit that it is not there? Maybe, you have to have 20 different photos. I don't know the answer.
Well, in my world, it's all about who controls the gavel.
Right.
And you get the gavel by getting the majority. We're just down 3 or 4 votes right now in the House of Representatives. We're looking at 25 or 30 congressional districts that we could flip. Those districts in Florida, Michael, we didn't win those, but we went up 13 or 14 points in both of them. And if we get a 13 or 14 point shift nationally, that will be a tidal wave of new Democrats in Congress. And then it will be a completely different game. It might be a lot of fun for them to weave and dodge and give us the finger because they control the gavel and there's no consequences. But there will be consequences when we restore some semblance of regular order here.
Yeah. So let me ask you this then, because if a migrant is detained without access to a lawyer and then deported in 48 hours, what part of the Constitution is still functioning in that scenario? I mean, seriously, what's left of the 5th and the 14th Amendment?
Yeah, at that point, due process are trampled. Due process provisions in both the 5th and the 14th are being trampled. I suppose what's working in some sense is Article 2, the president's power. And of course, the way Trump would read that is to do whatever he wants. That's not our interpretation. That's not the Supreme Court's interpretation. The president's job under Article 2 is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed, not rewritten, revised, usurped, impounded, redirected, to take care that the laws are faithfully executed.
You ever wake up after a week of nonstop political chaos, look at yourself in the mirror and think, damn, I aged like a president in his 2nd term. Yeah, well, me too. Long days, longer news cycles, and a diet that consists mostly of rage and revenge will do just that to you. That's why I gave Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet a shot. And let me tell you, it's like a full body reset without the misery of actually fasting. Prolon's a plant-based nutrition program of soups, snacks, teas that keeps your body in a fasting state while still feeding you. It works at the cellular level to jumpstart rejuvenation and help your cells act like they've just had a motivational speaker and a green juice. It's real science, it's real results. And now, boom, they've rolled out the next gen 5-day program. And now, boom, they've rolled out the Next Gen 5-day program. It's 100% organic soups and teas, richer flavor, and ready-to-eat meals. So even a certain president couldn't screw it up. Developed over decades at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by legitimate top medical centers, Prolon has been shown to support biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. Look, I did the 5-day program, and no joke, I felt better, lighter, cleaner. Now I'm all in for Next Gen. And here's the deal for my Mea Culpa listeners. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering Mea Culpa with Michael Cohen listeners 15% off site-wide, plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. So go now and visit prolonlife.com/Mea Culpa. That's PROLONLIFE.com/Mea Culpa to claim your 15% discount as well as your bonus gift. That's prolonlife.com/Mea Culpa. Give your body a break. It deserves it. Believe me.
And that's not what's happening. I mean, Donald Trump interprets the president's control over the executive branch to mean he can do whatever he wants. That's wrong. That's not the function of the president.
No, it's not. You know, since we were talking about how crazy this group of individuals, this MAGA group is, you yourself, as have I, have faced threats. And we're now seeing Trump critics, right? Judges, journalists, whistleblowers, all being targeted by mobs, literally stalked online and even threatened by other elected officials. Question I want to ask you is, are we living in a democracy or a mafia state?
Well, that's the right question. And, I'm thinking about my son, Michael, my son, Tommy. Tommy had a quote that he loved that he would invoke from the philosopher Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein said that the truth of an empirical proposition is whether it corresponds to reality. The truth of an analytical proposition is whether it corresponds to the rules of logic. But the truth of a moral proposition is the truth of a moral proposition is the courage with which you act to make it real in the world. So when you say, are we going to be a democracy or a mafia state? That's not going to be determined by a Ouija board. That's going to be determined by us. And, whether we're willing to go and fight and how much courage we're willing to show to stand up against authoritarianism everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. Well, what do you do then when people inside the administration openly suggest using the DOJ, as they did to me, right? Or the IRS to investigate political opponents? I mean, how is that any different from how Erdogan or Putin handles dissent?
I mean, those are Donald Trump's heroes. Those are his role models. They want to do it, like Erdogan in Turkey or Putin in Russia or Orban in Hungary. It's really not different. I mean, the Hungarian example is interesting because it really is what Steve Bannon and a lot of other of the right-wing Republican intellectuals argue they want to follow. They want to basically sack the entire federal workforce, then replace it, rebuilding it with their own party functionaries, making the government like a one-party state, keep elections going in name only by disenfranchising people, imposing voter registration obstacles, and then creating an illiberal democracy, which is what Orban calls it. This is a democracy without liberty, without rights, which is no democracy at all. That's basically just like mob rule and no freedom for anybody. That's obviously a deranged version of what we've been trying to build over the centuries.
Congressman, it's funny because you talked about courage. In fact, in my Substack, I talk about that exactly this morning. Teddy Roosevelt's statement, courage is not having the strength to go on. It's going on when you don't have the strength. And, all I can say is, to you, you exemplify that Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, it's so easy. And I've watched too many members of Congress, I hate to say it, on both sides of the aisle, specifically GOP, but way too many Democrats that they stick their head in the sand and they're doing nothing. They're just not making the necessary moves in order to do what we need as the American people to ensure our democratic republic future. What do we do?
Well, I appreciate that, Michael. And I'll just say, it's easier when you've been touched by it yourself. Nobody knows that better than you. I mean, to be thrown into solitary confinement for exercising your free speech rights, that's pretty intense. You can see that an authoritarian future is very much within the scopes of these people if they can get away with it. And I was there on January 6th. I saw when they were using to mobilize violence against democracy when they were out of power. And I see how they're willing to mobilize the government when they're in power to completely extinguish democracy and freedom. So it all depends on what's going to benefit them on a particular day. We've got to be constitutional patriots and stand up for what our forefathers and foremothers and prior generations of Americans have built in the country and keep moving forward and not lapse backwards. Because, I hate to say it, but once we get through this struggle, and we will, and once we win it, and we will, and we restore real democracy to America, we have got to deal with climate change because it is a nightmare bearing down on all of humanity.
But nobody's even talking about that. We're trying to talk about not destroying the Constitution. Congressman, I can't thank you enough for you, just for you being you. Forget about becoming even here on Mea Culpa, just for the fight that you have in you and for the fight that you are putting forth on behalf of all Americans, Republicans, Democrats, and independents. Thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you, man. Thank you for hanging tough, and thank you for being a constitutional patriot for everybody.
Appreciate you so much, my friend. Thank you.